But with the federal government and federal contracting, it's a long game. And if you can see it like that, that it's a long game that's going to have lots of payouts, but you've got to be really patient and you've got to be earnest because they have so many choices. It's like speed dating, right? And you can go to these small business matchmaking events and it literally is like speed dating. And so it's how are you going to make yourself stand out? How are they going to remember you? So that when they do have a need, your name or your face, company's logo is going to appear in their mind. With the federal government, it's usually going to be at least a 1 year to a 5 year contract. And so it's a 1 year to a 5 year marriage. And that's how they see it. Your chances of winning as an incumbent are just so high as a federal contractor because of just that whole relationship now starting over again. And usually they're 3 to 5 year relationships.
Hello and welcome to CSA's Collab Space. I am your host, Amy Cisse. I am here today with Melissa Ovard. It is such a pleasure to have you today.
Me too. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your show.
Absolutely. We have had so many wonderful conversations, and I just had to bring you on because you have provided so much valuable information to me. And I also wanted you to just share your knowledge and expertise with the audience. So, if you could please tell us about your company, Snowbird Consulting Group, and what your company provides as a service.
Well, again, thank you so much for having me be here. This is so exciting. I'm so glad that you're doing this, and especially um, just I think there's lots of women-owned businesses that just need to know what's going on, and if we can do anything to help support one another and give any advice and receive any advice, I just think that's a wonderful way to. I'm like I said, this has been the highlight of my week. So thank you again for having me on. So, Snowbird Consulting is an employee engagement firm, and we've been providing services primarily to the federal government. We do consulting services, we provide training, but our whole focus is trying to make the workplace more um, with more peace of mind, with just helping folks understand that there is a process that can be used to get along with people that you didn't choose to work with. And there's a lot of different things that are in flux, especially when the federal government's your client, and every 4 years there's a lot of change. And our goal is just to help support our clients so that they can fulfill their mission.
I don't think I've ever asked, like, what made you start the business?
Two things. Number one, my business partner, who happens to also be my husband, he had wanted to start his own federal contracting firm, but he didn't know how to bid. And
Mm.
so when he realized that that's what I had been doing, I guess for 10 years before, and helping other large businesses, small businesses, mid level businesses win proposals, um, that was helpful to see that. But second, I had gone home to Utah. I'm originally from Utah, and I had gone home for Christmas, and I stopped by one of my last jobs that I had when I lived in Utah. And they are also a federal contractor. And so I just stopped by to see my old boss to say hello. And she said, I need you to go start your own business because so much of the work they were doing was going small business set aside. And so she said, go and start your own business. We'll mentor you. We'll provide you all the support services that you need, the contract shop, the proposal shop, and all the technical expertise. And I had never thought of starting my own business besides, my husband saying we should, but you know how you just say things. But to have an old boss who had wanted to groom me to replace her as a succession plan, but then I had chosen to leave the business before that. But for her to still say, hey, I think you should go and start your own and we'll help support you with that, it made it feel real, because I think with family members, right, even if if it is, your husband slash business partner, it's you have to sometimes hear it from someone else. And I think because also she was one of the best female bosses I had had as well. It meant a lot that she I took it that she believed in me and that she trusted me, that she would want to have this old business that I used to work for now be a partner. And I came home from Utah just so excited, and I created the LLC, and she went to a higher up and they said, nope, we're not interested. And so I am so grateful they said no, because it would have been taking us into a line of work that it would have been trying to build a company that I had never envisioned for myself. And it would have been very much the ambition of, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's nice to have an ambition that's not only driven by revenue.
Mm.
I and we could have made a lot of money doing it that way, but and probably more than we are today. But I'm so much happier that this is how it organically ended up going, because it's hard to just make that decision, especially when you're a full-time employee.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right? It's almost like you have to be pushed out the door because you'll never. How can you say no to a paycheck that comes every 2 weeks? And I can't even imagine going back to that.
It's like you get to a point where you're forced to make a decision.
Right.
And when you get to that point, you know, like, this is what I have to do, and it's crystal clear. And you know that your entire life is about to be flipped upside down,
Yes.
but you know you have to do it. And you just have to trust that everything that you've done up until that point has prepared you, or you're going to have someone that's going to help prepare you and keep helping you grow,
Right.
or you're just going to figure it out as you go along.
And it's usually that latter.
Exactly.
Fake it till you make it.
Yes. And you said something that was very important. That was such a small word. Bid. You knew how to bid, right?
Right.
And for people who are not in the government space, like, I don't think you realize, if you're not in this space, how important knowing how to bid is. And you've taught me so much, because learning how to do business development, getting the work in the commercial space is a whole different ballgame than the federal government space, let alone state, local, all those other
Right.
spaces.
Right, exactly. And there's pros and cons to either. But with the federal government and federal contracting, it's a long game. And if you can see it like that, that it's a long game that's going to have lots of payouts, but you've got to be really patient and you've got to be earnest. And there's something about being able to get a contract. And when we've gotten private sector ones, right, like any day they can just turn around and say, we don't need your services anymore. And while that can happen with the federal government, it doesn't it's rare and in between when it does. And so I don't know if that's, if the fruits, because we've had a lot of these conversations too, because laying that groundwork, I mean, it's a 2 to 5 year process.
And yeah, and I was not aware. I was not aware until you broke it down, and it makes a lot of sense. The forecasting, the pipeline, the relationship building.
Right.
It's a
Right.
lot. I remember, so we just got on the GSA schedule, which is a contract deal,
Congratulations.
and my team said, "All right, we won a contract now for the federal government." And I said, "Well, we still have to bid on opportunities." And they said, "What?" So can you
Oh
talk a
no.
little bit about that, right? Because I think that you gave such a great analogy of, like, all the different steps of the, the the ways in which you can win opportunities and the different levels. GSA schedule versus what's out there on sam.gov versus you
Right,
know,
right.
and
Category management and all of those things. Right, exactly. And I have to give it out for so I was trained by Shipley, which is the I don't want to say it's the premier business model for proposal development, business development, but I think it's one of the oldest and the one of the most tried and true, especially um by like the big companies, that invest for years into capture and everything like that. But what I appreciated so much when I took a lot of Shipley classes, I took the training. I was actually going to be a trainer for them, and then I actually did a lot of consulting too, especially with small businesses. The thing with Shipley, it helped me understand that there's two parts. There's the capture part, which is before the RFP ever drops, the request for proposal. And then there's the request for proposal, the proposal part. And it's two different strategies and it's two different games. And once was able to understand that, and especially if you put in the work for the capture, then the proposal kind of writes itself. That was really helpful to understand that if you're not out there developing the relationship, and it might mean you put in a few sources sought responses or market research, participate in that, and you're not going to get it. But it doesn't mean it's not a good use of your time, because that's the hardest thing. I don't know if you've kind of got there yet, but it's hard to know what to invest in, and
right.
especially when it's just brand new, because you've got some contra RFPs that you can't just put something in. Um, but when you can really start building, well, let me back up. I think the best thing to figure out is, what is it that the federal government is buying, and do you provide it?
Step A.
Step A, right? And then figuring out then how to get in front of those folks that would need those services, because they always need new ideas. And with tech, right, the new idea could literally be a new approach, the way you do project management, or the way that you collaborate, the way you brainstorm with your customer, the way you collect needs assessments. And all of those things are things that they don't really want to always have to do. And so if you can make that experience as helpful, and as the key is to always be top of mind, because they have so many choices. It's like speed dating, right? And you can go to these small business matchmaking events, and it literally is like speed dating. And so it's, how are you going to make yourself stand out? How are they going to remember you, so that when they do have a need, they know that they can, your name or your face or your company's logo is going to appear in their mind, because they just meet so many contractors. I mean, they are the prom queen. They're the most popular girl in the school. And so how are you going to make yourself stand out? And sometimes that's just, being the most responsive. A lot of it is just making it easy for them to do their job, and letting them know that that's what you're here for. You know, always making them feel like that they are the customer.
And I've also kind of heard that too, right? Like with writing proposals, like if you can't even address their requirements and writing a proposal that fits what they're asking for, they just
Right,
toss it out.
right,
They
right.
want to see if you can follow instructions first and
It,
foremost, right?
exactly. So one of my employees, and she was on the program side, so she would evaluate proposals. And when she told me that the first thing they would do is just see what proposals went over page count, and then they would just throw that proposal aside, because it was one less proposal they had to read.
Hmm.
I was like, you don't even read it? Because you could just read it up to page 25 and then don't read 26 or 27 or 28. If you can't follow instructions, then why in the world would we trust that you can manage a multi-million dollar contract? And
Right.
I really couldn't argue with that rationale. But when I was doing the Shipley thing, it was so interesting to have former federal employees, contractors, I mean, sorry, contracting officers and program managers be in the class. And they would literally say if people's proposals was just a picture,
Mm.
because we are so sick of reading, we're so sick of hearing that you're the greatest and the brightest and the best, and then you don't have any sort of objective evidence to show us anything that you can quantify. But if you have a picture, if you have a graphic that can help us understand your approach, you'll always get more points just because we have more confidence that you know what you're talking about and you took the time to try and depict it in a more easier, friendlier way to understand.
And I
And I thought that was really scary and helpful all at the same time.
and I've been on proposal teams where there
Mhm.
is that person, like when I'm working with a prime contractor, they have a person dedicated to creating graphics for the proposal.
Just right. Can you imagine?
Right.
Right. Right. Mhm.
And that's another piece, right? Is as a small business, how do you prepare yourself to attack this massive proposal with all these requirements? And it's sometimes a tight turnaround. Because I've been a part of many proposal processes, again, with prime contractors, where they have a whole team and they have
Right.
the pink team and the red team reviews. And, these are the dates for pins down. And it's like a well oiled machine when it comes to the way in which they address putting their proposals together, and lots of different people writing different parts, right? Oh, you're going to handle the management approach, you're going to
Mhm.
handle these tasks. Like, how do you even wrap your arms around it? I mean, we've responded to some proposals, but I would love to hear from you, Jess. How do you tackle that as a small business?
I think if you always have in mind that that at some level you've got to start from scratch, right? You can have some components that are plug and play,
Mm.
but the client knows when you're just copying and pasting from another proposal. And the worst thing is if you have a typo in there, like you've got the wrong agency name, you've got the wrong contact person. That's just, yeah. But the more that you can really help them know that you understand what they want. And so, always try to have an executive summary. Even if it's going to take, let's say you have a 15-page count, then make sure you only have 14 pages and everything can fit in there, because that executive summary, it just needs to be a page to 2 page, but literally the C level, right? They'll just read that page
Mm.
and they can override the evaluation team. So imagine if you have a 15-page technical and you might not score as high on some things, but because you've given them the vision that you think that they have and you're regurgitating back what you believe they want, that could put you over the edge, because it's like a marriage, right? With the federal government, it's usually going to be at least a 1 year to a 5 year contract. And so it's a 1 year to a 5 year marriage. And that's how they see it. And that's why a lot of companies that are the incumbents, your chances of winning as an incumbent are just so high as a federal contractor, because of just that whole relationship now starting over again. And usually they're 3 to 5 year relationships. So it's just, yeah. So that executive summary, there's a school of thought that you should write that first. I wish I could say I've always followed that. I wanted to get to that place, because sometimes it's just a lot easier to write the technical first. But I think if you can outline it as much as you can based on the RFP, and you give yourself the page limits based on the points. So if it's 100 points and your technical is going to be worth, let's say 50 points, then the bulk of your page count needs to go towards that technical. And then after the technical, everything's past performance. And that's what I wish I had understood sooner, is that is about past performance. And the more you can show you've got past performance, the more they're going to feel comfortable to be in a 1 to 5 year marriage with you. And that's the difficult thing is I don't the federal government is a very different client than the private sector.
And so why do you think that's the case? Is it about risk?
I think there's a lot more handholding with the federal government, because with the private sector, they could just go to lunch with somebody the next day that, let's say, is also an employee engagement firm. And they could just turn around and say, guess what? We don't need your services anymore. We're going to go with this company instead. You don't have to worry about that with the federal government. When you go in with a contract, it is a long term commitment compared to the private sector. And so I think if they know by the way you're courting them, the way you're trying to make their job as easy as they can, like a lot of times I'll just call, leave a voicemail, um, instead of going through the email route because number one, they get so many emails. They can't keep. And then two, it's the federal government. So everything can be FOIA'd.
Mm. And what
And you
does that
don't want to, pardon?
and what does that mean?
A FOIA request, so a Freedom of Information Act. And so, let's say something down the line, there's some sort of congressional investigation or a journalist is going to write a story about something. And, they can just FOIA request things. And you just always want to be thinking a couple of steps ahead for the client. You're doing everything you can to protect their risks as well.
Very good point. We handle data, right? And so, yes, everything on everything on your machine is trackable. Um, it's downloadable. It is searchable. And so, I think the perspective also is they also have to be very cautious of not showing favoritism, right?
Very much so. Right. Right. Making sure that that every that it's just a equal, sorry, it's a fair playing field, right? And I think the hardest thing for a small business in federal contracting is knowing who to partner with because it's so cutthroat with the large businesses. And they don't need you. They need you and they don't. And so creating a relationship with your prime contractors, which we've been really fortunate to be able to do that, but it's also because I knew what to do because of my old day job when I was a full-time business development folk. And so, when I would be managing and doing the color review team, the team reviews that we were talking about, and having all of those different writers and things like that. And when you have the assignment for the writers be with different companies, that's just a whole other ball of wax. And so, just finding the right partnerships, but also, yeah, checking in with the client and making sure, are you doing okay? Because, we want to be delivering high quality customer service. And if we are always reminding them that we see you as a customer, it's easier to stay top of mind. And I like the federal government. I like to see my tax-paying dollars go to work. I like to feel like we're helping with impact.
Mm.
And it's harder to have those moments, I think, in private sector, at least in the areas of work that we do.
Yeah, because one of the perspectives that has been interesting as of late, and it was because of you pointed it out to me, is when you can appreciate the organization's mission
Hmm.
and when they're doing something that resonates with you. When you said the word impact, that's exactly what I thought about. Uh, there's a mission that aligns with your core values, and you want to help them be successful because at the end of the day, they're helping others be successful, which is awesome.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So, you talked about the proposal process, you talked about when you get the client, making sure that they know that they're a customer of yours, where you're going to provide excellent service. Do you suggest, as a small business, that people should tackle writing the proposals themselves, or do you suggest hiring someone to help you with writing a proposal?
I think if you can afford it, right? Because especially, wherever you are in the small business process, if you can, to get at least just a proposal writer, right? To get an expert to be able to see how it's done. So let's say you're a really good writer already, and let's say you've been doing the proposals on the commercial side. But if you can swing it, I would get a proposal writer or a consultant just so that you can see um, how the evaluation process is going to be, because you're really writing to that, and your proposal is going to stand out that you don't know what you're doing if it's comparing, if you've got 3 to 5 10 other companies competing, and if they've been around the block a few times and they understand how this works, you want to make sure that you're not top of mind for the wrong reasons.
Mm,
And of course, as a small business, that's the bias that we're always going to go up against. The assumption that we're not going to do as good a job because we're not a large business. Well, you're right, we're not. If because we don't have a huge overhead budget. But that doesn't mean we can't still show that we can read instructions, and we can, put our best foot forward. I think the hardest thing, the mistakes I would see the most, is when folks would want to use a past performance that was not relevant, but it was their favorite customer, or they really liked the work that they did. Okay, but is it relevant to this work? Or it is relevant, but it's 5 years old.
right.
And usually if it's past 5 years old, then that's not considered relevant. And I have to admit that, I've to have my business partner who happens to also be a lawyer, so much of when I realized that a proposal just turns into the contract. So that's also why the language has to be very, specific to the evaluation criteria, because you literally are writing your own contract if you win.
That makes sense. I never thought about it from that perspective, because once you put together your pricing and you say, like, these are the tasks that I'm going to fulfill, you're absolutely right.
Right.
Didn't think
That's what
about it
they're going to
that way.
hold. Right. And so then it helps you to kind of see where you can be creative, and where you need to also be technical.
Right. And you also brought up a good point too, about like maybe you don't want to necessarily go after, writing the proposals and submitting the bids on your own. Partnerships are amazing too, especially if you find like the right partners. And you brought up the concept of dating previously, and it is kind of just filling each other out and
Right.
seeing how you're going to work together, and just kind of seeing what synergies exist between different companies. And I think that it's also about just being flexible,
Hmm.
because each partner company that we've worked with has been different in some ways. And so it's like, okay, now I have to learn how you operate. And I always say, like, if it's someone else's client, like I'm gonna follow the lead of what you would do with your client, because it's your client at the end of the day, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna make sure that I kind of follow suit with the way that you want things handled with your client, so that we keep good energy, good vibes going with both teams.
No, you're exactly right. Because the worst thing would be if the client, because they could, if they wanted to, they could say, "Can you switch out your subcontractor?"
Mm,
Right. And because if it comes across that you're going to be difficult to work with at the very beginning, it's just, there's a lot of people that federal government employees have to deal with all the time. That's difficult. You don't want to remind them of just being, another individual that's going to make their job harder because they don't get the support that they should. You know,
Mm.
it's hard to be a federal employee. It's a lot of times it's a thankless job. And going through a major transition change almost every 4 years, possibly, new political appointees and, this revolving door that comes in and out and depending on who, the spectrum of the administration, right? Like the policies can just swing so much. And so that's also, I think, too part of understanding the agency or your client's mission. But then where is that mission fitting with the new administrations? Employee engagement sometimes isn't what a lot of recent administrations want. And that's been interesting to see, the work kind of ebb and flow and be a little bit different. But um yeah, it's definitely I'm so glad that I ended up going down this route. I'm like I said at the beginning, I'm really glad that my former boss's company said no, thank you. It was like the best thing that could have happened to us. Oh, I think the other thing I wanted to say too, as a small business, and especially as a woman-owned small business, as a minority-owned small business, as a minority-owned women's small business, it's important that we keep a mindset of abundance.
Mm.
You're going to meet a lot of different players that it's going to feel, this mindset of scarcity. There's only going to be so much to go around. And that's where we start getting cutthroat, or we start cutting corners, or we start feeling, left out. And the more that you can just know that every opportunity, if you put your best foot forward and you're really trying your best to keep getting better and improving your craft, and for some folks that could be the technical side, because you kind of do it all too, right? Like you manage your proposals and you're also a main technical lead as well as running the company.
Exactly. And, someone had asked me, I was talking to them about like a potential opportunity. And, I kind of feel like I'm very open to having conversations with lots of different people. And you just kind of have to see if both parties think it's a good fit. It's just like interviewing for a job, right? You can go
Right.
on 5 different interviews, but it doesn't mean that both parties are going to say this is the right fit. And my
Right.
thought is that there's more opportunities out there, and I think that you could ask questions. You could try to, I know I hear that with government contracts too, you can get a debrief on like why maybe you weren't selected to win the particular proposal. I haven't necessarily done that, but and I don't know what your perspectives is on that, but I just feel like if I didn't get this one, I'm gonna get the next one, and I'm not gonna let that like bog me down and get
Right.
all sad about it. Like I'm just gonna keep moving forward because what else can I
Keep
do, right?
moving forward, and if you can get a debrief, one thing that we do in our own training on around employee engagement is trying to help people understand that getting feedback, constructive feedback, gives you a performance edge. You want to welcome it, and the more you can figure out how to, because it's hard to get constructive feedback. It's not a wonderful walk in the park. But if you can somehow start realizing this is the only way I'm going to get better at this and understand what I didn't before, um, and it might not apply at the next opportunity or the next RFP, but more likely than not, it's going to. It was interesting because when I used to consult for business development on, I had a client that was larger than life and had a wonderful reputation, and they were kind of the shiz, and they do that, right? And they lost a bid. It was a state bid, and so they asked for a debrief, and the feedback was, you didn't listen to us at all you did was talk about how great you are, and you did this and this, and that's not what we needed. And then you told us you could accelerate the time frame, the timeline it would take to complete the project. We don't need it done faster than two
We
years. If it's a 2-year project, it's a
Mhm.
2-year project. you're coming in and telling us you can get it done in 6 months. Well, then you're not. And they were just stunned. They had never received such constructive feedback. Um, but I was like, this is a wonderful opportunity because it would be worse if you were continually doing the same thing. And this was the feedback they were saying about you, and you had no idea, and you weren't trying to change your approach, and worse if you're coming across as arrogant, because that's probably the worst thing you can do as a firm that's trying to get the work, is come in and say, we know more than you who took all this time to write that scope of work. And yeah, that was a wonderful experience to learn vicariously through a company who had never received negative feedback. I'm like,
I,
I'll never do that.
right. And I also learned early on, when you're doing a discovery call, like with a new potential client, like in the commercial space, like you're not supposed to keep talking and saying all these things that you can do. You're supposed to listen and hear what they
Mhm.
have to say. So that's it. It does give us an air of, I'm so arrogant. This
Right,
is why you need me. I think I'm the best. And it's like, are you even listening?
right, right. And especially when it's so many working parts, because I didn't know what they had. I don't think I had helped them with the final proposal, but when I heard what the feedback was, that the main criticism was it was a 2-year project and you tried to convince us to do it in 6 months. I was like, oh yeah, if it's a 2-year project, it's a 2-year project. Now, and you can have a strategy to win. And then once you get the work, then you can go in and tell them, hey, by the way, we could also do this simultaneously, and that means it would be cutting, be more efficiency and cutting some costs here. But you do that after you win, or
Right.
you submit 2 bids,
Mm,
because that's happened too. Oh, we can do it this way. Well, we also could do it this way, and you give the client a choice.
I didn't know that you could do
But if
that.
you but if you submit it, but you have to first do the one that's compliant.
Right.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, and so that's the catch, right? Is, will they say, what if they see the non-compliant one first, and then they don't even realize that, wait, you submitted the second one, or they say, well, you submitted two, and now they're both not compliant. Like, I think that would be such a slippery slope.
It can be. I mean, usually you could just put it both together, and you put the first compliant one, and then the second one, it's very clear that this is because there is a clause in the FAR that they will accept alternative proposals. But now that it's also so electronic, you don't run the risk as much as, I mean, back in the day, we were always submitting them hard copy, and you'd have the binders all out and everything like that. And one of the firms that I worked for, they had me hand deliver the proposal, but then they had me stay in country for another week to do all of the capture and business development. And it was wonderful information that could have gone into the proposal, but we'd already submitted it.
Mm,
And this was a big company that I would have thought would have known it's not going to really work that way, but I'll take it, because it was in a different country, and it was wonderful to connect and pretty much do marketing linkages, business development in country in case you want. The other thing too with that as well is one of the individuals of the firm had received some intel from somebody that she used to know, that she used to know, that she used to know. It was bad intel. So I think the pricing was like 10 million over, because she had listened to someone and she just trusted that they knew, and of course they didn't win because of price.
ooh, that's risky.
Yeah.
That is definitely a lot to consider. And I think that when we started out, just saying that the federal government space is a whole different animal than the commercial space for sure. Are there any experiences that you've had where you didn't really expect to happen and it was like, oh, this is a learning experience?
Yes, as a positive one, so we do a lot of training, and the course that's kind of our flagship product. I think we've probably provided it to maybe 40,000 federal employees over the last 4 or 5 years in like four different agencies. But that just came out of a conversation. And my
Mm,
business partner, it was actually him, and he was waiting for another meeting with another employee from the agency. And so they were just, talking shop. And she was just asking some questions. And like a month later, she came to us and said, "We'd like to buy that training." And we were like, wow. If it hadn't been for the individual that they were both waiting for who was just running late, that conversation, it was maybe a 15-minute conversation. And so I think just always realizing you don't know where the opportunities could be. And this individual that you're meeting with could be a long lasting customer. I just found out that that individual has retired now. And, I wish we could have said goodbye, because so much of that created a change in our company, but created a real product that has been successful and is still in demand. And it just came from a conversation.
that's awesome.
So
And
yeah, you just never know where the opportunities are going to be.
and it's amazing how organically it happens. And I think that when you have those types of experiences, you can definitely relate to, opportunities are in abundance and they'll just literally fall into your lap sometimes.
Right, right, exactly. And going back to the when I was talking about when you were asking how I got started and that former boss, it was so funny because years later we were actually at a small business conference in South Africa for USAID. And my husband, he ran into one of his former clients who had been very instrumental in inspiring him to be a federal contractor. And so he was there as a small business, but he was the small business that the old firm had chosen, and we didn't even know each other. It was just that random, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's the individual that got the bug in you, that thought about doing a federal contracting firm. And he's like, yeah, but you're not going to believe this. He's partnered with your old firm. They turned us down to go with him. And it made sense, especially with the line of work that he was doing. He was based in, I think, Los Angeles. The company's more in the West Coast than out here. But the world is too small. And I just thought, wow, that could have been us. And I'm so glad it's not.
That's awesome. Wow.
So,
Amazing story. All of your stories have been amazing.
oh, this has been wonderful. I'm just so happy that you're doing it, because I just think it's important that people know that there are allies out there and resources and folks that have probably gone through a lot of what they're going through now. And if there's any way we can just pay it forward and just help one another succeed, I think that there just really is enough to go around.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. That's exactly why I'm doing this. And that's exactly why I want to have just amazing people share their perspectives and their stories. And we can help each other along the way. And it's not so scary going into
It's not so
business.
scary.
Yeah, you just gotta figure it out as you go along. What else can you do, right?
Right, exactly. And be willing to ask for help when you need it,
Oh, I
because
ask
that's
lots of questions. Yes.
yep. Yep.
To
There's
whomever will answer my questions. Well, Melissa, it was such a pleasure having you on the podcast today. How can the audience get in contact with you?
probably the best is through LinkedIn. If anybody has any questions, or yeah, especially if they're just starting out, especially to be a federal contractor, please feel free to send me a message or a connection.
Thank you, Melissa. It was such a pleasure having you today.
Thank you.